Oh, you're going to make me cry. No one's ever asked me that before. It made me choke up a bit. I would want my grandchildren to know that freedom is worth fighting for, and nobody's going to take up that fight for you.
My friends, let us consider that acuity is the refined clarity of thought and perception which enables one to discern subtle truths.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Acuity Podcast, Politics and Culture. I'm the host, Dr. Lavranos. I'm the CEO and Chief Litigator at Acuity Medical Law, and my lovely co-host, Nurse Amy Hamm, is our Communications Manager, and she's going to introduce a very special guest that we are so excited to bring to you, to have a conversation with. So, Amy, please introduce Tamara.
Yeah, so Tamara Lich, I think as far as Canadians go, requires no introduction. But that said, she is the peaceful 2022 Freedom Convoy organizer who was arrested, jailed, and later stood trial for mischief. As Tamara points out, this was the longest mischief trial in the history of the Commonwealth. So both Tamara and her co-organizer, Chris Barber, were sentenced to 18 months of house arrest. And Tamara just launched what she calls her stand against malicious prosecution and negligent investigation. She's suing the Ottawa police, the prosecutor, and others. And this is in part for her abhorrent treatment after an appearance in a photograph that triggered a Canada-wide arrest warrant. Tamara wrote about how homicide detectives flew her back to Ottawa in leg shackles. She lost her job, precious time with her family, was denied bail, and spent 30 days in remand, all for a nonviolent mischief case. Thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, it's lovely. It's good to see you. I think the last time we saw each other was on a cruise ship in Alaska, like a year ago.
It was. I know it's hard to believe it was a year ago already. Yeah, it was a good time.
Maybe you can tell us about house arrest, how that's going, how and when you leave the house, and just sort of give us a rundown of your day to day.
Yes, well, it's been a very interesting experience so far. I realized just this morning that we've just gone over 7 months. So Chris and I were sentenced to 12 months of house arrest plus 6 months of curfew. My sentence will be served January 21st of 2027, with Chris's following in, I think, late April or early May. It's been a bit of a challenge, but that said, one of my specialties and the reason I'm in this mess to begin with was because of my logistics skills. So it just takes a few extra steps to get everything that I need to do sort of scheduled out. For example, I flew to Ottawa for the Canada Strong and Free network event a week and a half ago, and in order to do that, I need to have the flight times sent to my probation officer, any stops along the way for gas or to use the washroom. When I land, when I arrive where I'm going, I have to let her know what room I'm staying in. So, there's a lot of extra steps, even just to leave your house. There's no, running out for a coffee or stopping by Tim Hortons on my way to church or anything like that. So it's sometimes a bit of a challenge. But that's what I feel very lucky. I live, we have a decent home, and my daughter and my grandsons live here. So it's not very quiet very often. So, it's been good. It's been, I'm looking forward to having this over with. And I think it's going to almost feel weird, when the sentence is complete, even though there's still appeals and other things that are happening. That'll be the first time in over 5 years where I was not under any kind of conditions. I was able to move freely and speak freely. So that's going to be a bit of a mental adjustment.
One of the things that we always do on the podcast, sort of like at the very beginning, we talk a little bit about our personal lives. And so this is actually a really great question, because we always talk about what life is like for each of us and what's been happening the previous week. Run us through like your day-to-day with your family. What do your grandchildren know or appreciate about grandma's circumstances, your community members, what are their reflections, and what's that like for you?
Well, it's been great living with my grandsons. My oldest grandson is 10, so he obviously knows, what's happened. But he also, like his teacher, his teacher last year told him that she knows who I am and that she supports me. So he came home from school and said that to me. And
That's
my
lovely. That's really
it was
lovely,
really
both for
lovely.
him, for
Yeah.
you, and from the teacher to say that. That's like really
Yeah.
special.
I got to tell you the funniest story is when I first got back from jail the first time, which is still weird for me to say, but after the convoy, when I got home in March, I picked him up and I took him to, it used to be called Rutgers, the fun and games places or whatever. So we go in there in the middle of the day and it was just him and I. And then this couple came in with their two kids and they saw me and they just stopped and stared. And they came over and shaking my hand. And he's just looking up at me with these big eyes. They want pictures. And then more people came in and it repeated itself. Well, he knew at the time, even though he was only 5, that I play in a cover band, a cover rock band. So he's like, Grandma, you're famous because you play in a band, right? He's so cute.
Oh.
Not exactly, little guy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And my youngest grandson is only 3, so he obviously doesn't really know what's going on. But, I think the hardest part for them and for me is I can't go watch my grandson's baseball games, So I said, it's okay, buddy. Like, October will come and I'll be able to catch the end of your football season at least. And he's literally plays like a block from my house. The school that he plays at is right there. My 3-year-old grandson asked me the other day if I could please take him to the water park, which is also a block away. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't. So, but they understand. We're very open with the kids, so they know exactly what's going on, and they get it. It makes them sad, and it's situations like that break my heart too. But there's nothing we can do about it, and we're just going to push through. And I'm here with them lots. I get to take them to school in the morning or drop them off if I need to. So a typical day for me is getting up. I'm an early riser. I'm usually up between 4 and 5 in the morning, and that's when I try and do my social media stuff and just get ready for the day. I'm allowed to still volunteer at the food bank. I served my community service both there and at my local church, and those I managed to get those wrapped up in February, but they've permitted me to stay and volunteer, so I'm down there 3 times a week. And as far as the community members go, like I actually had, another client walk in the food bank on Monday and came over and asked to have a picture with me. So even to some of the clients that walk in there, for the most part, I have a lot of community support. There's obviously, people in this community that don't support me, but I think for the most part, I have a lot of support locally, for sure.
Tell us about your appeal. Sorry, you appealed. Yeah, you appealed your conviction. Yes. I think it was October of last year when your sentence was handed down, right? Yes. And you're wanting an absolute discharge, which would, like in legal terms, would mean you have no criminal record whatsoever. It's just wiped from your record. What are your expectations? It sounds like you don't think that will happen before your house arrest ends, but are you still hoping that you'll get your record wiped?
Well, that would be great, in my opinion. However, it's just a mischief charge. So as terrible as that sounds, I mean, at the end of the day, it's not going to stop me from traveling. It's not going to stop me from going to the United States. It's not a crime of moral turpitude, I believe is what it's called. So it's really it's a giant nothing. Of course, I mean, I would like to have it, stricken from the record, of course. It's going to be a process. I talked with my lawyer just a few days ago, and we still don't have a date to even find out, if they're going to hear the appeal. So, I think we're still looking at 6 to 8 months before that'll even happen. And then if they want a retrial or order a retrial, because I'm appealing my conviction, but don't forget the Crown prosecutor is also appealing our acquittals on the intimidation charges as well as our sentencing. So if a retrial is granted either or, we're looking at another 2 years before that happens. And realistically speaking, I don't think after 7 years that a judge is going to put us in jail. They want 7 years for myself and 8 years for Chris Barber.
That's crazy. Yeah. I remember when this was like on the eve of your sentencing, I was so nervous because I'm like, Canada has gone so sideways in so many ways. And I just felt sick. I can't imagine how you were feeling. I'm sure it was a million times worse. And I was just like, I can't stand Canada. If they put these two in prison, it will just I think it would cause riots in the streets, I'm sure. I was partly relieved by your sentence, but it's still so egregiously wrong what you're going through right now.
Well, especially when you consider that I'd already spent just about 50 days in jail on a mischief as a first-time offender with no, criminal history. That's unheard of. It's literally unheard of. As you both know, a mischief in Canada is usually a slap on the wrist or a $50 fine or, just a don't do that again. So, it's, I have to actually laugh about it. I mean, if you can't have a sense of humor about this, I don't know where I'd be, but, I'm a grandma. My first criminal charge is a mischief that I got at the age of 53 years old. Like, make it make sense. I'm just one of those mischiefy grannies, I guess. Yeah, like, especially when you see all these other cases that you guys see too every day, sexual assaults, murders, drug dealers, and some of these cases, perpetrators are getting off with nothing, and they're not even Canadian citizens, because they don't want it to impact their immigration process, which to me, is absolutely bonkers. And we see these cases again and again and again. You're seeing them, the catch and release. Well, I was denied bail twice, and I was not dealing drugs. I was not involved in any violent crime. There is not a lick of evidence out there that even shows me breaking the law. Au contraire, So yeah, so I'm really looking forward to the appeals process, because I mean they didn't prove, well, as far as I'm concerned, anyways, that a crime was committed. They're trying to label the Freedom Convoy as a mass mischief. I mean, and this is where we are in Canada now. We just make up words and make up things if we have nothing to accuse people of doing that, don't believe the same thing that we do.
Yeah, it's a surreal experience talking to you, hearing your reflection on what's been going on, and putting that in the context of what this is all ultimately about. You would think that you're some kind of like hardened criminal, repeat offender, and you're as far from that as you can possibly get. I very much appreciate the spirit. Like you seem like you're still so good natured about it, and I love that. It's better to laugh than to cry about it. You touched on a couple of things there about the court procedure. Is there something that you think that the court had that was particularly egregious or a particular flaw in its reasoning that you thought was really offensive? And obviously, the disproportionality is one thing. Like, that's obvious.
Right.
I mean, like Aristotle
Yes.
famously said that all justice is about proportionality. So if we're going to put that aside, if we look at, whether or not you are guilty of this mischief, is there something there that they labeled you with or as, or that they allegedly have proved that you disagree with in particular?
Well, yes. I mean, again, we went through the video evidence, and I learned a lot about this process too. And I have to say, I find the judicial system comes up lacking. For instance, I didn't realize, before this started that, you can't just put evidence in. You can only get evidence in through a witness. So I was disappointed that I wasn't able to testify. I understand the reasons of the criminal lawyers for not wanting us to testify, and it makes sense. But in my particular case, I've been cross-examined by this time 6 ways from Sunday, so I wasn't worried about getting up there and making a mistake. And not only that, I mean, all I can do is tell the truth, and like, I don't know how Crown prosecutors go to bed at night in some cases when literally their job is to get up there, make you look like a liar, twist your words, try and, convince a judge that you're the worst person on the face of the planet. We did see a lot of the video evidence that came in about through all this, but there's not a piece of evidence that shows that I was committing a crime. They tried to do some of that with some of our text messages, but again, that's all context also. So I think it was just a lack of evidence produced on their part to secure a conviction. That's just obviously my opinion. I mean, every convicted criminal says, hey, I'm innocent. But I mean, in my case, hey, I'm innocent.
Yeah. I actually just wanted to touch on one thing there that you said, which I think is really important. We talk about the zealous advocacy, right? A lot of the times the phrasing of your question, or I should say the framing of your question, is exactly inverse. It's like, how can the criminal defense attorney go to sleep at night? And the thought in legal theory is that person deserves the absolute best defense that they can mount against overwhelming odds of the state, right? And then the responsibility that they have is the quote unquote zealous defense of their client. They have fiduciary responsibility. It is part of the system. However, much to your point, and this is one of the things that I'm sure we will get into, is the sort of politicization of what's happened to you, and the fact that you are being made an example of. I mean, it's kind of hard for anybody to know your story and not think that. But the role of the prosecutor should not be to make a paragon out of you, right? They're not trying to criticize and undermine you. They are in the pursuit of truth. Technically speaking, there are multiple filters where if the evidence is not there, they should not even charge you, and it keeps on going. If the evidence is not there, or if there are mitigating factors, they have to disclose those, right? Because they should be pursuing the truth. They should not be harassing a villain, right? So the framing of your experience, which I'm sure is sincere, is very telling as to what the nature of this whole process is.
Right, exactly. And in this case, I'm talking about the Crown prosecutor and not the criminal defense. But you're absolutely right. And I sat in that courtroom for days and days and days and days, and as my first experience, in something like this, I was shocked at some of the things that the Crown prosecutor said, especially the original one. Now, don't forget, shortly after my book came out, the original Crown prosecutor was yanked off of our case because he was absolutely terrible. And that's one of the reasons why I launched this breach too, is because my case against this breach is that there was no due diligence. When we went into my bail hearing and they put up the picture of me and Tom Marazzo and the people that were at this gala dinner, the homicide detective investigating my case couldn't tell you who anybody else in that photo was. My sister could tell you who they were, where they lived, and what they did for a living. She was my surety, and she went in and made sure that she did more of an investigation than the homicide detective assigned to my case. I watched him sit up there and just answer, I don't know. And, a phone call to my lawyer, a phone call to me could have prevented the first ever Canada-wide warrant issued over a mischief and prevented me from being flown back to Ottawa by 2 homicide detectives in leg shackles. Now, they were kind enough at the airport to take my handcuffs off, but when they put me in the wheelchair because they thought it would preserve my dignity. But they wheeled me through the airport in leg shackles in a wheelchair. Like, thanks, guys.
That's so insane.
Thanks for caring about me.
Insane.
Yeah.
Spectacular.
And for context, it's so absolutely atrocious. And so this was, you were awarded the George Jonas Freedom Award. So this was, yes. You were an invited guest speaker at these cross-Canada events receiving this award, and you had bail conditions at the time, and you appeared in, so I think maybe you could explain what your bail condition was and why this appearing in a photograph was supposedly a violation of your bail conditions that led to this arrest warrant.
And I love this question because it leads into the same crazy Crown prosecutor. So one of my original conditions upon release in March of 2022 was that I was banned from the province of Ontario, which in and of itself is quite funny because I don't know a lot of people that are trying to break into Ontario, but I do have quite a few friends that are trying to get out of Ontario. But I digress. So in May before, of course, this particular dinner was in Toronto. So the month previous, my lawyer and I applied for a bail variation hearing to have that condition removed so that I could attend Ontario to go to this dinner. So that we were successful in that. However, they just changed it from the province of Ontario to the red zone downtown around Parliament Hill where the convoy was. During this same hearing, the variation hearing, the Crown prosecutor, the first one, Moise Karimji, brought in some evidence and called a brand new bail hearing over this pendant. And this pendant, I don't know if you can see it, has a picture of a truck on it, and it says Freedom Canada, and it has a little Canadian flag on the back. Pardon me. So
mischievous.
Yes, he found this picture of me on social media, or someone had sent it to him. So he wanted a brand new bail hearing to throw me in jail because I breached my probations over this pendant. And the short story is, a mother from, she was Canadian, but she was in Thailand, and she'd been stuck in Thailand over the entire pandemic, unable to come home and see her children. She made jewelry, and so she made these for me, or she made these to sell because she wanted to help raise money for the truckers too. So she sent me this gift with a letter and her phone number. So I texted her immediately and I said, thank you. This is absolutely beautiful. I will never take it off. And I rarely have since. So she emailed me back and she said, well, you're like my brand ambassador. I want to help you raise money for the truckers. Can I put this on my social media? Of course, I emailed her back and I said, like, I didn't say anything about the brand ambassador. I said, and one of my conditions was I can't support or advocate for anything to do with the Freedom Convoy. And to her posting my picture question, I said, I have bail conditions saying that I am not allowed to post to social media or have anybody post on my behalf. So I cannot advise you to post it or not to post it. But I'll tell you, a lot of people take my picture and they post it. So anyway, she posted it. And then when she posted it at the bottom, she put photograph posted with permission.
Oh,
So now that doesn't seem like a big deal, but you have to remember this particular Crown prosecutor was like a dog with a bone. And he tried, every time I turned around, this guy was trying to throw me in jail. So anyways, we went forward and had this hearing. Even in this particular hearing, the judge ended up basically telling Moise Karimji to take a time out after Moise told the judge he should recuse himself from my bail hearing. It's been quite something to behold. So at the end of the day, I didn't go to jail. My variation was granted. I was allowed to go. And so we went to that dinner in Toronto. And then, of course, had our photo taken with Tamara. And ironically, the reason that my breach charge was stayed was because I found that email to that lady in Thailand from 2 years ago, just came across it one day, and I sent it to my lawyer because it proved that I was telling the truth. Even though it wasn't specifically the same thing, it still proved that I was being honest and truthful, and then the charge was stayed shortly after that.
absolutely insane. Great story. I mean, these are such awful tragedies, but for a Canadian icon to go through this and to have persevered through all of this, through the harassment, the abuse, the politicization, do you feel like there is a politicization here? Do you feel like you are a political martyr? Do you think that this is a series of liberals who are attacking you for their own purposes? Do you think that do you find that the judges have been neutral or not really? How would you sort of like rank the political perspective of the people antagonizing you?
There's a lot to that answer. There's a lot to that question. Yes, I definitely think the convoy participants have been politically persecuted by an ever increasingly captured judiciary. When you have the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada issuing a clearly very biased article in his opinion about what was happening in Ottawa, and clearly he wasn't there, nobody was being held hostage, there was no anarchy happening whatsoever. That's a problem. I mean, we're talking about a Chief Justice that has a bust of himself sitting in there that he refuses to answer any questions about. So I feel that this is, and I think it's very telling, like I said earlier, even just about other cases that are before the courts or have been before the courts just since the convoy alone. 7 years, asking 7 years on a mischief is literally unheard of. Nobody. There was a gentleman here from Alberta that literally sliced his daughter's throat and stabbed his son.
Yeah.
And he was let out on bail. He was living in his van down by the river. He finally got sentenced, and I don't think he even got 5 years. 5 years for trying to kill his own 2 kids, and they want to see Chris and I in jail for 7 and 8 years. What we've seen is, these guys at the parliamentary level, in the judiciary level, seem to have just dug their heels in, and it didn't matter. It doesn't matter what we could have possibly came up with. We were never going to convince them that we weren't domestic terrorists, which is really unfortunate because I grew up believing that the justice system, law enforcement, public health, that these guys were all there to give people like me a voice. People from nowhere, Saskatchewan. I grew up on the prairies in the middle of nowhere. And I always believed that they were here to help me. They were here to protect my rights, and they were here to give me a voice. And every single one of those institutions has failed miserably.
That's so true. I think that something that we don't think about enough in Canada is the enormous loss of trust in our institutions and what that might signal if we have any sort of actual emergency in the future. I think it's a crisis waiting to happen if something goes south, because people have seen what happened to you, what happened to Chris Barber, and what happened during COVID with public health authorities. We don't trust. I think more than half of the Canadian population has little to no trust in the judiciary, in public health, and that's can go south very, very quickly. Mm-hmm. Something else that's going on legally is there's still this pending class action lawsuit again, which is so crazy too. So this lawsuit, it's $290 million that they want from you and from Chris Barber and from all of the protesters. We were looking at their website this morning. Maybe Mark can pull it up. So some of the people that are trying to get this lawsuit pushed through, there's one Zexy Lee, Jeffrey Delaney, Happy Goat Coffee Company. And they're sort of on their front page. I think this Zexy character talks about, I'm heartbroken by the trauma that is being inflicted upon me and my neighbors, to feel like a prisoner in my own home by people who claim to stand for freedom. Meanwhile, you were held in remand for 30 days?
Yes.
Maybe
18 the first time and 30 the second time, yeah. And the funny thing about Sexy Lee is she was definitely not a prisoner in her home. I mean, there's plenty of video footage of her out there, out and about in the streets, telling truckers to F off and go back where they came from, and just absolutely being miserable. She full on admitted that she was throwing frozen eggs down at truckers and people in the streets below, like at 15 floors up, which in and of itself could potentially be mischief if you hit someone and injure them. But there was never any charges for that. She's quite the character, this one.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
I was looking at this. Do you know anything about the firm or the lawyers who are representing the class of plaintiffs here? I was looking at their website and I was doing a little bit of a dive on them. The head lawyer there has a bunch of YouTube videos for criticizing conservative governments. So there's a political activism component to what it seems like from the chief lawyer's experience, but I don't know much more than what I was able to catch on Google and YouTube in about half an hour. Do you know much about them and what their motivation is here? I mean, like, obviously, if such money could ever be awarded, that makes the class action suit very appealing. But I mean, like, outside of the finances, is there anything else that you know about them or the motivations or things that you think about?
No, I honestly think this is pure greed. You got to go back to the start. So we were in Ottawa, and this was before the GoFundMe was shut down and the campaign was stopped. And so we had raised $10 million in donations. And then all of a sudden one day we're being hit with a $10 million lawsuit. Like, what are the chances? Then we found out Paul Champ, sent his little minions out into the protest to go find some local residents who were upset and didn't want us there, and just had them start signing up for this lawsuit. Zexy Lee, he happened upon Zexy Lee, who is a federal government employee. So there's a big shocker. And anyway, so she put her name to it. And then, again, they're trying to say that their businesses were impacted. They had to close their doors. Well, that's not true. If people closed their doors during the convoy, they did it because the city told them to, their bosses told them to, or on their own. The businesses that stayed open while we were there made more money in 2 weeks than they had in the previous 2 years. I mean, people just seem to forget when they're talking about our case what the previous 2 years were like. And, I feel bad for the people there that were uncomfortable and felt afraid. I do feel bad, but it's not my fault that you feel afraid. That's something that you need to deal with. These are like middle-class Canadians. And so I get really angry sometimes when, I hear about the honking. Of course, I get it. The honking annoyed us too. Trust me, nobody was happier than us when we finally got an injunction to stop it. And no one worked harder than Chris Barber and the road captains to go out and try to ask these truckers to please stop honking or to schedule it somehow. Now I've got talking and I forgot what my point was. Oh, but so when I hear these complaints about, well, you didn't suffer through the honking and you didn't suffer through, I was down there too. And I could still sleep at night. I didn't hear the horns all night, number one. Number two, we would stop, every single stop that we made along the way, a minimum of 3 people would come up to all of us, each of us, 3 people each, and tell us that they were about to take their own lives. They had it all planned out. Some of them were ready to do it the day that we started rolling until they saw those trucks roll. So I'm very sorry to the people that have hurt feelings over honking horns. But I told my lawyer flat out, I will serve 100 years before I will ever apologize, because I am not going to apologize for saving one life, for one nurse getting their job back, for one mechanic getting his job back, for, kids that can go kiss their grandmas in a long-term care facility. I will not apologize for that. And I would gladly serve 100 years in jail instead.
Totally. I don't think I'll ever forget. I got into a very big fight with a colleague of mine in the Emerge during this time. And he was saying, well, all the noise, all the honking, can you imagine what that would be like? That would make you mad. That would drive you crazy, And I was like, my dude, I don't care at all. I don't care at all. If their eardrums bleed, I don't care, because there is no comparison between the minor, the trivial inconveniencing of downtown Ottawa near Parliament, the place of protest in Canada, with a lively protest. And that's the worst descriptor you can give, a lively protest, compared to all the sinister policies, the suffering that's perpetuated that the truckers are trying to fight against. These are not comparable. They're not in the same galaxy. So don't sit here and wave a sympathetic flag to me about some upper class Ottawa people walking to and from Parliament building who are like, oh no, average Canadians in trucks. I don't care at all. I don't care at all.
And a lot of these people were genuinely scared because they'd never met a truck driver before. They never met an oil field worker before. There was a lady that Trish Woods interviewed for our podcast who, she wasn't being mean or smarmy. She was literally saying, I was too scared to leave because I've never met basically anyone that got their hands dirty for a living. And she was afraid of them. So, but that's indicative of a much deeper problem. I mean, why do these people in Ottawa, why do these certain people in Ottawa feel that way? Why are they afraid of working class Canadians? Well, I think we know why. There is a certain bubble there. And it's really unfortunate that she feels that way. And again, I do feel bad for anyone that felt that way. But the other thing you have to remember is that this was also during the pandemic. So while normally there's probably 50 to 60,000 people that live downtown in that area, the city planner in our trial, for some unknown reason, at the end of his testimony, was getting up from the stand and just volunteered. Yeah, but there was only like less than 18,000 people down there at the time. So I'm
right.
Like, exactly. Thank you. I mean, the judge never used it, but but that's huge because a lot of people, and I still see it today, and Amy, you do too. I mean, there's people from British Columbia or wherever that all see on social media that are your horns were this, your horns were that. Well, they weren't even there. How could they possibly know what was going on? You know how they know? Because they watch the CBC and they watch the CTV and they listen to global news instead of, I mean, thank goodness that we had citizen journalists and independent journalists on the ground, because if we didn't, everyone in Canada would literally believe that we were going to overthrow the government.
That's kind of a forgotten or not so much talked about story of this whole thing, is that I think without independent journalists, it would have been so easy for the narrative to be just the exact opposite of what a lot of people now understand to be the truth of what happened down in Ottawa. And Aris talked about friends that he disagreed with at work. I had a lot of disagreements with friends at the time too, who were, pressuring me. We agreed on other controversial issues, but they pressured me to not stand with you. And they're like, oh, come on, you're going to look at these people. They're a bunch of maniacs, or, sort of a classist view of oh, look at these, the truckers, sort of talking down upon these people and suggesting that it was ridiculous and that they didn't understand the nuance of the situation. They didn't know what was best for Canadians. And a lot of these people have completely changed their opinions in the years afterwards. And now I know some that went from thinking that you were terrible to supporting you and understanding that what happened to you was an incredible travesty of justice. And I don't think that would have happened without independent journalism. So that's
Andrew
huge.
Lawton's book. Andrew Lawton deserves some credit because he wrote that great book about it.
Yes,
and
he did.
Then he and I became friends, and I started emailing him back and forth, and now he's doing a great job in Parliament. I love the guy. And you're so right. This is it's these kinds of moments, it's these kinds of crises where heroism really gets to shine. And so that's why, Tamara, you're a Canadian hero, right? That's why you deserve the accolades that you have received. Part of it is the political and the judicial persecution against you. And then part of it is the heroism to even do it, even outside of any consequences, right? Even going through this process is remarkable. I mean, the logistics and the management and everything is spectacular. The will to do it, and so on and so on. And equally, for every hero that's out there, there's equally so a coward. So I had an encounter with a fairly senior person in the Nova Scotia province. I'm not going to give any more descriptions than that. And when I ran into him, he said, "You know what, Aris?" He had been remarkably quiet. He never said anything, and he had enough influence that he could have. He said, "You know what, Aris? It turns out that you were right about everything. You were right about COVID, and you were right about the truckers, and you were right about Trudeau, and you were right about the Emergencies Act, and so on and so on and so on." And you know what? I thought to myself, I'm like, okay, I really appreciate you saying that, even now. But man, you could have said it then. You could have said it then, right? So you also provide the impetus and the strength for everyone else to try and speak up. So, I always say that. Would I feel comfortable articulating my position if there weren't even 10% or 15% or 20% of Canadians out there doing this? So, it's a remarkable story, and it's tragic what has happened to you since. But I just love seeing how you're thriving as a consequence of all of it, Tamara. You know what? You've got a radiance about you, girl, and it's just really amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, a couple things about that. I don't feel like a hero. I feel like, I just get up and put one foot in the front of the other every single day. And some days it's sometimes harder to do. But I like to think that, people would endure it, I guess, for lack of a better word, like I have. And I'm also mindful. I mean, I feel like, Chris and I represented a large demographic of Canadians. The Freedom Convoy did, not just myself and Chris. And so I feel like it's really important to, try to handle this with grace, because this isn't about me. I mean, it's not going to do anybody any good if I fall on the floor, kick my legs and scream. This isn't just about me. And so I try to conduct myself accordingly, because I feel, that for people that support us and support what we did, I mean, it's for them too. And that's why I launched this lawsuit. I mean, because this isn't about me. I'm going to donate. I'll figure out my lost wages, and I'm going to donate all the rest if I win to, the Justice Center and the Democracy Fund, because I don't even want the money. It's not about me. This is about preventing this thing from happening to any Canadian ever again. If you are in law enforcement or a Crown prosecutor, you must take the right steps to preserve Canadians' rights. You just don't get to throw them in a cop car, throw them in a plane, and then throw them in jail for 30 days without doing your job. So, I think I just don't take that lightly, is what I'm trying to say. I don't take my role lightly, and I've been so blessed, as have we all, with people that support what we're doing. And I remember when I was arrested, and I don't know if you're a believer, but I just remember saying, okay, God, you're not done with me yet. We've exposed so much already. And he truly did through what we were doing. He exposed, what was happening at government. And so I was like, you're not done with me yet. This is thy will, not my will. And I believe that, well, my parents always told me God will never give you more than you can handle. But I hope he's almost done.
Yeah. Yes. So people are encouraged to visit. What is your website, Tamara?
Officialtamaralich.com is my website.
Yeah.
And I have a Give, Send, Go. I didn't send you the link for it, actually. I do have the Give, Send, Go campaign that you can search on that site. That's called My Stand Against Malicious Prosecution. I can't even believe it. I checked it this morning and it's over $52,000 already.
Wow.
So over halfway to my goal, which again shows you, that Canadians want to push back. They want some accountability. And right now, they're feeling like this is one of the only avenues they have. We have a federal government that keeps, appealing, now 4 judges' decisions that the Emergencies Act was unlawful and unconstitutional. So now they've kicked that down the can. People are starting to get really frustrated because there's been no accountability. Now, even with a pandemic, every single thing that has ever happened in Canada or the world that is a massive incident federally, not just globally, there's typically some sort of big investigation or inquiry afterwards, like what did we do right, what did we do wrong? And oddly enough, there still hasn't been one about the COVID pandemic yet. And so I think it's frustrating a lot of people. So I think a lot of support is just coming from people that, just want to give them a black eye however they can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was curious. I wanted to ask you how you felt about the federal government appealing the Emergencies Act decision. So, as you mentioned, 4 judges found that it was unlawful for Trudeau's invocation of the Emergencies Act during the protests. And now that Mark Carney is in charge of the Liberal Party, his government made the decision to appeal that. And as I'm sure you are aware, when the protest was going on, Carney wrote a Globe and Mail op-ed, and he used words, I think he may have used the word traitorous, like seditious. He was so opposed to you. So I guess it wouldn't have come as a surprise to see this appeal, but how did that hit you when you saw that the federal government was appealing this ruling that was sort of it was in your favor in a sense?
Well, I was obviously very disappointed, but not surprised. Not only do we know about Mark Carney's op-ed, we have text messages with his name listed in them between members of Parliament. Actually, I think it was Marco Mendicino and David Lametti, where they're saying, right. They're basically saying, what are we doing? We got to do something here. People are getting upset, and not stupid people. The quote was not stupid people either. People like Catherine McKenna and Carney. So, anyways, they're not stupid, I guess, as opposed to everybody else that they deal with in a day. But I was disappointed, but I was not surprised. These guys, like I said earlier, have just simply dug their heels in at every turn. And it started right from day one of the organizing of the Freedom Convoy. They came out and they're called us racist. Well, that wasn't true. But then we were misogynist. Well, that wasn't true. Well, then we were trying to burn an apartment building down. Well, that wasn't true. And they just dig their heels in. But let's also not forget, if the federal government walks away from this, then the lawsuits can start. And trust me, I'm sure there'll be a lot of Canadians. We have a lawsuit also filed against them for the freezing of our bank accounts. And we're being represented by Keith Wilson on that particular lawsuit. So if they don't keep appealing, they're essentially admitting guilt, which is why Chris Freeland got out there 10 minutes after the original decision was made. There's no possible way they could have read that decision in 10 minutes. So they knew they were going to appeal no matter what. I think the other playbook here, as we see with the Liberal government, is they just want it to continue on so people forget. They just want people to forget about it. It's why they banned me from social media for 2 years and banned me from a lot of things for 2 years and keep doing this. They just want everybody to forget. And that's probably the reason that we haven't had an inquiry into the handling of the pandemic either.
Yeah, that's totally
crazy.
Fair.
I think a question, this is a very broad question, but after everything that has happened to you and everything that is still happening to you, and this is something I grapple with a lot, do you still love Canada? Do you still have hope for Canada?
I still love Canada. I still love Canadians. I'm sad for what it's become and the direction that it's going. And honestly, my trip to Ottawa the last week was a little bit sad because I talked to a lot of people that are starting to feel like they were feeling during the pandemic again, and they're starting to feel like they don't have any hope. Even the conference itself. I mean, Mark Carney just stole a majority government for the first time in our history, and no one's done a thing about it. And what are we going to do about it? It's like Chris and I were talking about this lawsuit that I have. Well, I mean, I have to do it through the justice system because that's like, what am I going to do? Organize a protest? Write my MPs? Like people are really feeling like they don't have an avenue to seek accountability. And where was I going with this now? Sorry, Amy.
Are you still love Canada?
Yes, yeah. We're so lucky. We go coast to coast, really, literally in our travels, and there's still so many people that will still come up and hug us and cry on our shoulder. If you ever watch any of Chris's videos, people are honking at him on the highway, and CB, like other truckers, are constantly talking to him. We're so lucky. I'm also in a province that's currently, seeking independence from the country of Canada, and so, admittedly, I support that. I was 100% pro independence before the convoy happened, and then, of course, my experience, I ended up quitting the Maverick Party, and so it makes me sad, I think, but Canada's so big. My daughter lives in rural Manitoba. She cannot take her children for a walk unless she has a firearm with her because she's surrounded by bears and wildlife. I mean, you can't have the same kind of gun legislation in rural Manitoba that you have in downtown Toronto. I mean, and these are some of the things that, they're not working. Canada's so big. Our country, every province is different. Every province has a completely different lifestyle. But admittedly, it gives me a bit of an identity crisis because I fully support democracy. I support Albertans having a say and having a vote, and can totally see why a lot of people in the province want to leave Canada. And they don't want to leave Canada. I guess that's the thing. It's not about leaving Canada. It's about getting out from under Ottawa's thumb, basically.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, well said. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Like, I wish I could go back to the Canada of like the 1990s, right?
Yes.
The 2000s. Yeah. But I mean, like, over the last 15-ish years, things have really, really soured. I mean, like, let's be honest, it was since Trudeau's election, and things have really changed remarkably. And I don't want to leave Canada. I just want to go back to that Canada.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's hard to see.
The country I want my grandsons to grow up in, like I want them to see the Canada that I did grow up in. I was raised to, like I said earlier, I mean, I love the RCMP, when we were raised to really trust them and they were the good guys, and, multiculturalism, we celebrated our multiculturalism. There was an annual festival in Regina, Saskatchewan called Mosaic, and it was pavilions of all, these different cultures and everything. It was something that we did celebrate. And I was very proud to grow up and be Canadian. I just thought we were the best country in the world. What I couldn't understand as a child is why we didn't have the same kind of patriotism that I saw happening across the border. Because I lived in a lot of border towns. So, how they revered their flag and they were so fierce in their patriotism. And I could never understand why Canadians didn't have that same verve for their country. And the Freedom Convoy for me was the first time that I ever understood what that felt like. And I think a lot of other Canadians did too.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I remember the same, learning about the cultural mosaic when I grew up. And I went to school for many years in Alberta. I moved around a lot when I was a kid. And that's a concept that was ingrained in my mind, is like, we're multicultural. We have all of these, we're Canadian, but we invite and embrace other cultures. And like you're saying, you now see these court decisions handed down where, look at the way that you're punished, and yet someone who's not even a citizen here on the basis of their skin color is told, well, even though you murdered someone or sexually assaulted someone, we don't want to get you deported, so we're going to just give you a slap on the wrist. And meanwhile, someone who's a great patriot and a hero to our country is going to be severely punished for not even having committed a crime. It's just such a perversion of what Canada is supposed to be. It makes me sick. It makes me
And
sick.
I
But
don't know if you know, I don't know if you know this, but I've always been very much against Gladue. Now I'm Métis and Scottish. My grandmother was Cree, my grandfather was Métis, Cree, French, and I refuse the Gladue because I've never believed in it. I mean, I don't need, number one, I didn't commit any crimes, so I don't need you to make excuses about my heritage as to why I created those crimes. I've just always felt that it was an extremely racist policy, and crime is crime. It doesn't matter what color your skin is. That has nothing to do with it, in my personal opinion. So, yeah, they wanted to do the pre-sentence report and use the Gladue, and I said, absolutely not. We are not using it.
That's badass. Oh, I love that. And for anyone who doesn't know who's watching the Gladue, it's these sentencing principles. If you have an Indigenous background in Canada, it's almost like a mitigating factor that they take into account for your sentencing. So that's incredible that you said, don't do it for me. I love that. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, that's yours, even more of a badass because you would do that.
Yeah. What would you like to, for your grandkids, when they are 20, 21, 22, what would you like them to have learned from the trucker convoy and from your ordeal?
Oh, you're going to make me cry. No one's ever asked me that before. It made me choke up a bit. I would want my grandchildren to know that freedom is worth fighting for and nobody's going to take up that fight for you. And that it's okay to sacrifice things for that purpose. I've said many times when I've spoken, my saying is, if there was no buts, there'd be no problem. And I can't tell you, and I'm sure just like you, Amy, people will come up to me and say, well, I support you, but, or I want to do this, but, or this is wrong, but. And if it wasn't for those buts, I'm telling you, we would have no problems in Canada. If all those people did something, got involved in some way, I mean, this country would be fine, but everyone's afraid. And I guess that would be my biggest message is don't be afraid. There's nothing to be afraid of because freedom comes from God and nobody can take that away from you.
Yeah,
that's beautiful.
I love it. I totally agree. Yeah, I totally agree. Tamara, thank you so much for taking the time for this interview. I hope that we'll have a chance to speak again. I think that history is going to be very kind to you. I think history is going to be very kind to the trucker convoy. I think already the tide has turned, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. I think that a lot of the hysterics and the knee-jerk response and the belief that people have in legacy media, all of that has taken a turn. We've reached the sort of worst of that. And so it's because of people like you and Chris, who have put up a fight when it mattered the most, that we're coming out of all of this. So I'm so grateful to you for many, many reasons, but now today, especially for coming on and talking to us and sharing your story. So I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was absolutely my pleasure. I can't believe we didn't do this sooner.
Yeah.
My friends, let us consider that acuity is the refined clarity of thought and perception which enables one to discern subtle truths.